Hey, how's it guys? Right, so in this video, we're going to learn how to use Google's Generative AI API in Python. Right, so the API is called PaLM API, and basically it's another Generative AI API, which is to compete with OpenAI's APIs. So right now, the Generative AI API is still in beta phase. And you have to join the waitlist to get approved to access the API. But usually the waitlist is pretty short. When I joined the waitlist, I got approved within like 24 hours. And to join the waitlist, you want to go to developers.generativeai.google, and that will take you to this website. And click on join the waitlist, and that's it. Now it comes to using Google's PaLM API to work with different models. It uses a platform called Maker Suite. Alright, so here's the interface. Now, currently there are 3 models available. Alright, so if I go into the documentation, and I'll link all the links in the description below. Alright, so if I go into the documentation, if I go into models, let me zoom in a bit more. Alright, so there are 3 models currently available. Let me see, they are here, right here. So the first one is going to be the text Bison model. And this model is being used to generate different text, such as if you want to generate documentations or if you want to generate business proposals, then you will be using this model. Then we have the Chat Bison model. And this model is being used as a chatbot, so similar to ChatGPT's model. Then we have this embedding gecko model. All right, so this one, I won't be covering this model in this video because this one is a little bit more complicated. It doesn't fit into the general usage scenario. So basically, you'll be using the embedding gecko model if performing any natural language task. I'll be covering the text Bison and the chat Bison models in today's video. Alright, so before we can use the API, we need to create a project in Google Cloud. Alright, so here navigate to console.cloud.google.com and enter. Now I'm going to show you every single step so you don't miss anything when it comes to learning how to use the API. Alright, so on the top, I'm going to create a new project. Alright, so here, simply create a new project. Now give this project name, and I'll name the project. Let's do Generative AI Demo. And I cannot insert underscore. Alright, so I'll use a dash. And let me zoom in. Then create the project. Now, once the project is created, I want to select the project. Now, we know the project is selected when we see the dropdown is selecting basically the project that we just created. Now, to use the API, first we need to create a set of access key. Now, click on the navigation menu, then go to APIs and services. Then want to click on the credentials. Now, to use the PaLM API, we'll be using API key to authenticate our account. So click on create credentials, then click on API key. Now I'm going to copy this API key, and which I'll delete after this video. I'm going to launch my Python script. Right, so I'll be using VS Code to create the script. Right, so here I'm going to create a variable called API key, and I'll paste my key here. Now going back, next we need to enable the PaLM API. So go back to navigation menu, APIs and services. Then want to click on library. Alright, so here search for, I think it's PaLM API. Can't remember. Let me try it. Alright, so it's going to be under Generative Language API. Now click into the API. We want to enable the service. And once the API service is enabled, we can now start writing our Python script. Alright, so here first we need to install the library. Alright, so I'm going to Let's see. All right, so let me use my PaLM test environment. All right, so to install the library, want to use the pip command pip install Google dash generative AI and enter. Now from the import statement, want to let me increase the font size. Now from the import statement, want to type import Google generative AI as PaLM. Then want to attach the API key using PaLM.config and will provide the API key. Now every once in a while, Google is going to release new models. And if you want to check if any new model is available, so basically we can use PaLM.list models method and to return all the available models. Now if I go ahead and run this code block, and it's going to return these 3 models as the current existing models. Alright, so let's work with the text Bison model to generate some text. Alright, so this is going to be example 1, text generation. Alright, so first we're going to create a variable, and this is going to be the model ID. Then I'm going to create a prompt, so very similar to OpenAI's GPT API. Now let's say I want to create a marketing proposal to sell an ice cream product, and I want to limit the proposal to just 50 words. Now once I define my model ID and my prompt, then I can make the API code using PaLM.generateText method. Now inside this method, I'm going to provide the model ID, the prompt. Now temperature is going to be the creativity of the output basically. If an output that is going to be conservative, it's going to be robust or reliable, then you can set the temperature value to 0. And the range is going to be between 0 and 1. So usually you want to use decimal place like 0.0 or 0.1, 0.9 and so on. Now if you want the output to be very creative, then you can use 0.99 or something like that. Now for the max output tokens parameter, I want to go back to the documentation real quick. Alright, so if we go into models section, alright, so if I go to the top, so here we have this attribute session. So these are all the configurable parameters. I haven't really looked into top P and top K, and we already discussed temperature. And we have start sequence, and which I'll cover that in a separate video because that's going to be a little more advanced. Now, the maximum token is associated to this max output length. So the token controls how long your output can be. And I believe that the current limit is set to 1024 tokens. And you can also control how many outputs that I want to generate. Alright, so for example, I'm going to generate 2 outputs. Actually, let's start with one first. If I want to generate multiple outputs, then we'll use the candidate count parameter. And for now, I'll set this to 1 to generate a single output at a time. Now, if I go ahead and run example 1 code snippet, right, so the API code is finished. Now, if I print completion, and it's going to return a, it's going to return a completion object that looks like this. And basically, this is just a variation of a name tuple object. Now, by default, so here, now if I want to return the outputs, then we'll type completion.result. And it's going to return the first result. Now, if the response contains multiple outputs, in that case, then we need to use, so I think it's going to be based on the outputs key, actually output singular. So here I'm getting the type error, and that means that this should be completion. And let me see. Oh, okay. The candidates. Okay, so it's going to return a list. Now from the candidates list, we can reference the first element. And that's going to turn the record as a dictionary object. And we can go ahead and reference the output key to return the first result. And the outputs for these two lines are completely identical. So usually I would prefer to go a second method just to be safe if there are multiple responses. Now let me change this to 2. So I want to return 2 different outputs. Then I can rerun the API code. Alright, so here I want to fix the statement. And I want to make this a loop. So I can say for output in completion.candidates. And I'll save this as outputs. Alright, so from the output option, the text is coming from the output key. And I can go ahead and create the outputs option. And if I loop the outputs option, let's do 50. And if I go ahead and print the list, now here's the first marketing proposal. Actually, not that one. So here's the first marketing proposal based on my prompt, followed by the second marketing proposal. Alright, so that's all for the generate text API. Alright, now let's work on the second example, which is going to be creating a kind of like a chatbot, basically. Alright, so I'll name the script demo-chat.py. And I can reuse my code snippet right here. Now for the prompt, now say I'm preparing for a job interview for a data analyst job. So here for the prompt, I'm going to type, I need help with a job interview for a data analyst job. Can you help me? Now with the Bison chat model, alright, so here I'm going to type PaLM.chat. So this is going to be the method associated to the chat Bison model. Now notice that here, the default model is already set to chat Bison model. So we don't need to do anything here. Now for the prompt, I'm going to assign that to the messages parameter. Now for the temperature, and since this is going to be a professional business interview, I'm going to change this to 0.2. Now context is a very interesting one. So context control the tone and the behavior how the response should be. I found the robot or the chatbot to speak like a CEO. Then for the context, I can say speak like a CEO. And the other way you can define the role of the chatbot is using an example, what the response should look like. And the model is going to mimicking the tone and the characteristic based on the examples that I provided. And to create an example reference. So basically you want to create a list. Inside this list, you want to have a list of tuples. Now every single tuple object is going to represent a singular message log. So the first item is going to be the message that you are sending to the chatbot. And the second element is going to be how you want the bot to respond. Then we can provide multiple examples for the model to study the example and try to mimicking the behavior. And can assign the examples reference to the examples parameter. Alright, so for now, I'm going to provide both context and examples to this chat API request code. Alright, so if I go in the run this code block, now from response, we can retrieve the response by referencing the messages attribute. And it's going to return a list. Now, very similar to OpenAI GPT API, you are going to have the author and the content. So 0 represents you, and 1 represents the chat bar. So the conversation is always going to be 01, 01, 01, and so on. Now, if we want to retrieve the messages, so we can say for message in response messages. I can print message, and it should be content. Let's do author and followed by content. Alright, so if we look at the output here, and start right here. Alright, so it starts with, I need help with a job interview for data analyst job. Can you help me? And this is going to be the initial prompt. Then here's the response from the chat bar. Now if I want to reply to existing message that are stored in the PaLM model or PaLM module, then we'll take this response object. This response object basically was kind of like a container. Alright, so for example, now as I want to ask a follow-up question, then I'll take the existing response object, then I'll use the reply method. Then I can ask a follow-up question. So can you provide me with additional detail? And I'll need to re-update the response object. And if once, you can simply rename the response object to something a little bit more descriptive. And once you make the API code, and here, let's do that right now. So I'm going to run the reply method. Now, instead of printing every single messages, I can simply use last attribute to print the last response. Now, generally, when you create a chat bar, your code doesn't look like this. So usually you will have the initial conversation point. In this case, it's going to be my prompt. Then you're going to insert a while loop. And it's going to be, so this is going to be a reference. Yeah, I'll put that right here. Then you're going to insert a while loop. And to keep updating the message log. And this will go to the top. Alright, so basically once we have the initial message chat log, I guess, then we'll basically keep asking new questions. So this will be an input prompt. So it can be input, should just go inside. And it may look like this. So a user will simply provide another input. And let's call this an S. And once the input is received, then we'll provide the input to the reply. Then we'll print the last response and continue until you break the loop. So this is going to be everything I'm going to share in this video. And hopefully you guys find this video useful. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give this video a like and click on the subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.